Dark synopsis. An experienced paranormal investigator accepts the ultimate challenge, spending 3 nights alone in the infamous Waverly Hills Sanatorium, where over 63,000 souls perished during the tuberculosis epidemic. What begins as documentation of paranormal phenomena transforms into a psychological nightmare when he realizes the dead aren't the real problem. It's something older, something that was never human, and has been waiting patiently in the basement of the 4th floor. By the 3rd day he discovers a terrifying truth. The sanatorium doesn't let you leave mentally intact, and what he brought home cannot be seen on cameras, only felt in the darkness between heartbeats. Chapter 1. Seeds of Despair. The dashboard clock read 11:47 p.m. when Marcus Chen's Toyota 4Runner crunched over the gravel parking lot of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. He killed the engine, and the sudden silence felt like a physical presence pressing against the windows. Through the windshield, the Gothic revival structure loomed against the October sky, a 5-story monument to suffering, its empty windows like hollow eye sockets watching his arrival with patient malevolence. Marcus sat motionless, his hands still gripping the steering wheel. 43 years old, divorced twice, estranged from his teenage daughter Emily, he'd spent the last 15 years chasing ghosts across America's most haunted locations. His YouTube channel, Phantom Truth, had 2.3 million subscribers hungry for authentic paranormal encounters. But authenticity had become Marcus's curse. In an industry flooded with fake jump scares and staged possessions, he'd built his reputation on one unbreakable rule. He never fabricated evidence, never embellished experiences, and never, ever ran from what he found. This principle had cost him everything. His first wife, Sarah, left him after he spent their mortgage payment on EMF detectors and thermal cameras. His second wife, Jennifer, filed for divorce the night he chose investigating the Villisca Axe murder house over attending Emily's 8th grade graduation. The court-mandated therapist diagnosed him with obsessive-compulsive tendencies and possible dissociative episodes. Marcus had stopped attending sessions after the 3rd visit. How could he explain to someone who'd never felt the ice-cold breath of something invisible on their neck that he wasn't running toward danger? He was running from himself. Tonight was different. Tonight was the culmination of a decade-long obsession. Waverly Hills wasn't just another haunted location. It was the mecca of American paranormal investigation, the place where the boundary between life and death had been ground so thin by mass suffering that reality itself seemed negotiable. The tuberculosis sanatorium had operated from 1910 to 1961, a period when the White Plague killed 1 in 7 people in the United States. At its peak, a patient died every hour. The bodies were removed through the death tunnel, a 500-foot underground passage that descended the hill, designed to hide the constant stream of corpses from those still clinging to life in the wards above. Marcus had secured special permission for this investigation through a combination of his media credentials and a sizable donation to the Historical Preservation Society. The official terms were clear: 72 hours completely alone, no outside contact except for emergency purposes. The building's caretaker, an elderly man named Gerald with milky cataracts and tobacco-stained fingers, had unlocked the front entrance at sunset, handed Marcus a single key, and said something that still echoed in Marcus's mind: "Don't go to room 502. And whatever you hear in the death tunnel after midnight, that ain't nobody calling your name." Gerald had refused to elaborate, climbing into his pickup truck and disappearing down the winding access road before Marcus could ask questions. Now, staring at the building's dark silhouette, Marcus felt a familiar cocktail of emotions: anticipation, fear, and something deeper, a hollow ache that had lived in his chest since Emily stopped returning his phone calls 6 months ago. He opened the console and retrieved a prescription bottle. Lorazepam, 0.5 milligrams. The psychiatrist had prescribed them for anxiety attacks. Marcus dry swallowed 2 pills, knowing he shouldn't mix them with the bourbon he'd been sipping during the 3-hour drive from Indianapolis. The metallic taste lingered on his tongue as he gathered his equipment. The investigation kit was extensive: 3 Sony A7S III cameras with infrared capabilities, a FLIR thermal imaging camera, multiple digital audio recorders, an SB7 spirit box, EMF detectors, a meter, motion sensors, and his most expensive piece of equipment: a full-spectrum camcorder that could capture light wavelengths invisible to the human eye. Total equipment value: approximately $47,000. Marcus had maxed out his remaining credit card to upgrade everything for this investigation. If he didn't capture compelling evidence, if this documentary didn't go viral, he'd lose his apartment in Indianapolis and probably end up living in this Toyota. The October air bit at his skin as he exited the vehicle. Kentucky autumn had turned cold early this year, and his breath materialized in small clouds that dissipated slowly, as if the atmosphere itself was sluggish. The sanatorium grounds were vast, 15 acres of overgrown grass, crumbling outbuildings, and gnarled trees that twisted into arthritic shapes. The main building's Tudor Gothic architecture should have been beautiful, with its arched windows and decorative brickwork, but decades of abandonment had transformed it into something malevolent. Graffiti scarred the lower walls, and several windows on the ground floor had been boarded up with plywood that had warped and rotted. Marcus approached the main entrance, his footsteps echoing off the stone pathway. The heavy wooden doors stood slightly ajar, revealing absolute darkness beyond. He paused at the threshold, feeling that familiar sensation. The atmosphere itself seemed denser here, as if the air molecules were pressed more tightly together. His grandmother, who'd emigrated from Taiwan when Marcus was 7, used to describe places with heavy qi, locations where energy accumulated like standing water, growing stagnant and toxic. Waverly Hills felt exactly like that. He pushed through the entrance into the main lobby. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating peeling paint, scattered debris, and the skeletal remains of what had once been the reception desk. The smell hit him immediately: mold, decay, and something underneath, something organic and sweet like rotting flowers. Graffiti covered the walls. Pentagrams, obscene phrases, and repeatedly, in various handwriting styles, the words Room 502. Marcus set down his equipment cases and began establishing his base camp in the lobby. He arranged his sleeping bag against one wall, positioned a folding chair near what would serve as his charging station, and set up a central monitoring hub where he could review footage from multiple cameras simultaneously. The process took 40 minutes, during which the building remained silent except for the occasional groan of settling architecture and the skitter of what he hoped were rats in the walls. By 1:15 a.m., he was ready to begin the first investigation sweep. Standard protocol dictated starting at the bottom and working upward. He shouldered his equipment backpack, activated his handheld camera, and spoke his opening narration to the lens. It's 1:15 a.m. on October 19th. I'm standing in the main lobby of Waverly Hills Sanatorium, about to begin 72 hours of solitary investigation in one of America's most haunted locations. Over the next 3 days, I'll be exploring every accessible area of this building, from the death tunnel in the basement to the infamous Room 502 on the 4th floor. No camera tricks. No editing to enhance evidence. Whatever I capture, you'll see exactly as it happened. If you're watching this video, then I made it out. Let's find out what's really waiting in the dark. He lowered the camera and began his exploration of the first floor. The main corridor stretched approximately 200 feet, with patient rooms branching off on both sides. Most doors hung crooked on rusted hinges or had been removed entirely. His flashlight revealed rooms stripped bare except for occasional debris, broken furniture, moldy mattresses, shattered glass that crunched underfoot. The walls bore layers of graffiti dating back decades, a palimpsest of trespasser testimonials and occult symbols. The EMF detector in his left hand remained quiet, registering only baseline electromagnetic readings. Marcus felt a twinge of disappointment. Despite his reputation for skepticism, part of him always hoped for immediate paranormal activity, concrete proof that would silence the online critics who called him a fraud despite never fabricating evidence. He entered what had been the nurse's station, a small room with counters still attached to the walls and cabinets hanging open like slack jaws. His thermal camera showed only ambient temperature variations, cooler near the exterior walls, slightly warmer near the interior. Nothing anomalous. He pulled out his digital audio recorder and conducted a standard EVP session. My name is Marcus Chen. I'm a paranormal investigator documenting activity in Waverly Hills. If there are any spirits present who wish to communicate, I'm here to listen. Can you tell me your name? He waited 30 seconds in silence, then asked, Did you die in this building? Were you a patient here? Another 30 seconds. The silence felt complete, almost aggressive in its totality. Marcus was about to move to the next question when his EMF detector suddenly spiked, screaming from 0.2 milligauss to 47.3 in an instant. His heart rate accelerated as he swept the device in a slow arc. The spike held steady for approximately 5 seconds, then dropped back to baseline just as abruptly. Did you just interact with my equipment? Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. If that was you, can you do it again? Nothing. He waited 2 full minutes, but the EMF detector remained flat. Possible explanations cycled through his mind. Electrical wiring in the walls, though the building had been without power for years. underground power lines though they were rare in this area, natural electromagnetic fluctuations, though the spike had been unusually pronounced. Or something else. Marcus moved deeper into the first floor, documenting each room, conducting brief EVP sessions, taking thermal readings. The building's oppressive silence began to work on his mind. Isolation investigations were psychologically demanding. The human brain, deprived of normal social interaction and subjected to stress, began creating its own entertainment. Auditory pareidolia caused investigators to hear voices and white noise. Visual pareidolia transformed shadows into figures. Marcus had trained himself to recognize these perceptual glitches, but knowing they existed didn't make them less unsettling. By 3 a.m. he'd completed the first floor sweep and returned to base camp to review footage and recharge batteries. Nothing overtly paranormal had manifested except that single EMF spike. He ate a protein bar that tasted like sweetened cardboard and drank water from a plastic bottle, then prepared for the second floor exploration. The stairwell was wide, designed to accommodate stretchers and wheelchairs. Graffiti here was particularly dense, layers upon layers of spray paint creating an almost abstract collage. As Marcus climbed, his flashlight beam caught something that made him pause: scratches in the concrete wall, deep gouges that looked fresh compared to the aged graffiti surrounding them. The marks formed a pattern, 3 parallel lines, then a space, then 3 more parallel lines. They repeated up the stairwell in groups of 3. Claw marks? Marcus examined them closely. Too uniform to be animal scratches. Probably made by someone with a tool, possibly other paranormal investigators trying to create false evidence. He photographed them anyway and continued upward. The second floor layout mirrored the first, a long central corridor with patient rooms on both sides. But here the atmosphere felt different. Heavier. Marcus's ears popped slightly as if the air pressure had changed. His thermal camera registered a temperature drop of 7 degrees compared to the first floor, despite both levels being equally exposed to outside air. He began his systematic exploration, noting that many rooms on this floor still contained metal bed frames, their springs rusted into abstract sculptures. In one room, children's drawings were taped to the wall, clearly recent additions from urban explorers, but unsettling nonetheless. The crayon drawings showed stick figures with X's for eyes and a large building with black windows. In another room, Marcus found a wheelchair facing the corner. Rust had seized its wheels and the vinyl seat was split and moldy. Someone had spray painted "She's still sitting here" on the wall above it. Marcus approached slowly, filming the wheelchair from multiple angles. As his flashlight beam swept across the seat, he could have sworn the wheelchair moved. Just slightly. A quarter-inch rotation, the frozen wheels somehow overcoming their rust to turn minutely toward him. Marcus froze, his camera trained on the wheelchair. He watched it for 30 seconds, barely breathing. It remained motionless. He checked his thermal camera. No heat signatures in the room except his own. EMF detector, baseline. He approached the wheelchair and examined the floor. No visible mechanism that could have caused movement. The wheels were genuinely seized with rust. He couldn't rotate them manually without significant force. Possible explanations: floor vibrations from his own footsteps, though the concrete was solid. Air currents, though the room had no open windows and he'd felt no breeze. Perceptual error: maybe the wheelchair never moved and his fatigued brain had created the illusion. Or something else. Marcus repositioned a static camera to monitor the wheelchair, then continued his exploration. By 4:30 a.m. he documented the entire second floor. More EMF spikes, always brief and isolated. Temperature variations that didn't correspond to architectural features. And sounds, soft, distant, like whispers just below the threshold of comprehension. He returned to base camp as dawn began filtering through the boarded windows, painting everything in shades of gray. Marcus reviewed his footage, taking notes, his mind simultaneously analytical and exhausted. The lorazepam had worn off, leaving him jittery and slightly nauseous. He lay down in his sleeping bag, intending to rest for just an hour before the next investigation phase. Sleep came hard and brought nightmares. In the dream, Marcus walked through an endless white corridor. Every door he opened revealed Emily's bedroom, but she was never there. Just her possessions, growing progressively smaller and more childlike with each door, until the final room contained only a crib with a mobile hanging above it, rotating slowly, playing a music box melody that made his teeth ache. He woke at 11 a.m. with a splitting headache and a text message on his phone. He'd kept it on airplane mode except for emergencies, but checked it now. Emily had sent it at 3:17 a.m. Just 3 words. "Dad, I'm scared." Marcus stared at the message, his heart contracting. He called her immediately, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried 3 more times. Nothing. He sent a text. Emily, what's wrong? Call me. I love you. The message showed as delivered but not read. Marcus sat in his sleeping bag, torn between investigation protocol and fatherly panic. Emily was 18 now, probably fine, probably just had a nightmare or some college drama. But that voice in the back of his mind, the one that had been growing louder since his second divorce, whispered darker possibilities. He was about to call his ex-wife Jennifer when his phone battery died. He'd forgotten to charge it while reviewing footage. Marcus cursed, plugged it into his portable charging station, and tried to focus on the investigation. But Emily's message haunted him. Dad, I'm scared. The afternoon passed in mechanical routine. He ate, reviewed more footage, organized equipment. By nightfall, he decided to explore the 3rd floor, leaving the infamous 4th floor, and room 502 for later. The building's oppressive atmosphere had intensified with darkness. Every shadow seemed pregnant with potential movement. Every sound, the building settling, wind whistling through broken windows, rats in the walls, carried sinister undertones. The 3rd floor was where the most severe tuberculosis cases had been housed. Patients in the final stages of the disease, coughing blood, their lungs gradually solidifying until they drowned in their own bodies. Marcus had researched extensively. The mortality rate on this floor approached 90%. Entire families had been torn apart here, parents watching children waste away, children listening to parents suffocate slowly in the night. The energy here felt different from the lower floors, not heavier but sharper, like the air itself had edges. Marcus's EMF detector began registering constant low-level activity, the device chirping softly in an irregular rhythm. His thermal camera showed cold spots that moved, shifting from room to room with no apparent pattern. He entered what had been the surgical suite, a large room with tile walls and industrial lighting fixtures dangling from the ceiling on corroded chains. The windows here were large, designed to provide maximum natural light during operations. Through them, Marcus could see the death tunnel entrance on the hillside, a concrete maw descending into the earth. In the center of the surgical suite, someone had arranged medical equipment into a grotesque sculpture. Rusted surgical tools, broken bed frames, wheelchairs, all twisted together and spray-painted black. It looked ritualistic, intentional. Marcus documented it thoroughly, noting that the arrangement was recent. No rust on the newly exposed metal where pieces had been scraped together. He was filming the sculpture from a different angle when he heard it. Footsteps in the corridor. Heavy, deliberate, moving from left to right across the length of the floor. Marcus went completely still. His rational mind offered explanations. Building settling, rats in the walls, perhaps even another trespasser despite the locked entrance. But these footsteps had weight, rhythm, purpose. They sounded like boots on concrete. He moved to the doorway and looked out into the corridor. Empty. The footsteps had stopped. He waited, controlling his breathing, listening with absolute focus. Then they started again, closer now, moving directly toward him from the right side of the corridor. Marcus raised his camera, filming the empty hallway as the footsteps approached. His EMF detector was screaming, maxed out at 100+ milligauss. The temperature plummeted. His thermal camera showed a cold spot moving down the corridor, approximately 6 feet tall and 3 feet wide, roughly human-shaped, and it was getting closer. The footsteps stopped directly in front of him. Marcus stood face to face with empty air, his equipment indicating massive electromagnetic and thermal anomalies, but his eyes seeing nothing. He opened his mouth to speak, to ask a question, to challenge whatever was standing there, when his camera's battery died. Instant darkness. The surgical suite's ambient light from outside had been minimal, and now only his small flashlight provided illumination. Marcus fumbled for a backup battery, his hands shaking despite his training. In that moment of darkness, he felt breath on his face, cold, smelling faintly of antiseptic and something rotten underneath. He stumbled backward, dropping the dead camera, his flashlight swinging wildly. When the beam stabilized, the corridor was empty. EMF detector, baseline. Thermal camera, ambient temperature. Everything had returned to normal as if nothing had happened. Marcus retrieved his camera, installed a new battery and tried to steady his breathing. His heart hammered in his chest. In 15 years of investigation, he'd experienced countless anomalies, but this was different. This felt intentional, intelligent, and it had been studying him just as carefully as he'd been documenting it. He spent the next hour reviewing the footage. The camera had captured the audio of the footsteps, crystal clear and undeniable. The EMF readings were visible on the detector's screen within frame. And just before the battery died, there in the final 2 frames, the full-spectrum camera had captured something invisible to normal light, a dark shape, vaguely humanoid, standing in the corridor. It had a face, or something approximating a face. Empty spaces where eyes should be. And it was looking directly at the camera. Chapter 2, Descent into Madness. The image haunted Marcus for the next 6 hours. He'd isolated those final 2 frames, enhanced them, studied every pixel until his eyes burned. The shape in the full-spectrum footage was undeniable. Roughly 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at angles human anatomy couldn't accommodate. But it was the face that kept pulling his attention back, that kept him staring until the laptop screen blurred. 2 dark voids where eyes should exist, and below them what might have been a mouth stretched too wide, or perhaps just a shadow that his mind insisted on interpreting as a scream frozen in time. It was 2:37 a.m. on his second night. Marcus sat in his base camp, surrounded by the soft glow of equipment lights, trying to maintain his investigative objectivity while something deeper and more primal screamed at him to leave. His phone had charged hours ago, but Emily still hadn't responded. He'd called Jennifer 3 times, but she'd blocked his number months ago. The last message he'd managed to send through social media simply said, "Check on Emily. Please. Something feels wrong." Jennifer had seen it but never replied. Marcus took another lorazepam, his third in 12 hours. The prescription said 1 every 6 hours as needed, but as needed had become a flexible concept. He chased it with bourbon from his flask. Just a sip, just enough to dull the edge of panic that had been building since he saw that thing in the corridor. The combination made his thoughts fuzzy around the edges, like watching the world through dirty glass. He needed to move. Staying still meant thinking, and thinking meant spiraling into the dark places where guilt lived. He'd chosen this investigation over Emily's 18th birthday party 3 weeks ago. Chosen equipment upgrades over child support payments. Chosen chasing ghosts over being present for a daughter who'd stopped believing her father loved anything more than his cameras and his obsession with proving the impossible. The death tunnel. He'd been avoiding it, saving it for when daylight could filter down through the entrance, but now the thought of waiting until morning felt intolerable. The tunnel was where bodies had been transported by the hundreds, maybe thousands, a conveyor belt of death that operated day and night during the tuberculosis epidemic's peak. If consciousness could stain a location, if suffering could seep into concrete and stone, then the death tunnel would be saturated with it. Marcus gathered his equipment: primary camera, backup camera, audio recorder, EMF detector, thermal imaging, flashlight, and his new addition, a motion-activated camera he could leave behind to capture activity after he left. He also grabbed the flask. Professional investigators didn't drink during investigations, but professional investigators also didn't take anti-anxiety medication or spend 3 days alone in buildings that felt actively hostile to human presence. The entrance to the death tunnel was accessible from the main building's basement level. Marcus descended the main stairwell, his footsteps echoing in the silence. The graffiti grew more disturbing as he went lower. Crude drawings of hanging figures, phrases like "they're still down there," and "don't breathe the air," and repeatedly, obsessively, the number 63,000, the estimated death toll. The basement level was a maze of corridors and small rooms that had served various functions: laundry, storage, morgue. The air here was noticeably colder and carried a damp, organic smell that made Marcus breathe through his mouth. Water damage had created black mold colonies that spread across walls like metastatic tumors. His flashlight beam caught movement in his peripheral vision. Just rats, he told himself, though the movement seemed too fluid, too deliberate. The death tunnel entrance was a rectangular opening in the concrete wall, approximately 7 feet high and 5 feet wide. A metal gate that should have secured it hung twisted and broken. Beyond the threshold, his flashlight revealed a corridor of rough concrete that descended at a steep angle into absolute darkness. Rail tracks ran down the center. The bodies had been loaded onto motorized carts and sent down into waiting hearses. Marcus stood at the entrance, filming, his narration automatic. It's 2:51 a.m. on October 20th. I'm at the entrance to the death tunnel, a 500-foot passage that descends approximately 100 feet from the main building to the bottom of the hill. Historical records indicate that bodies were removed through this tunnel to hide the death toll from patients still fighting for survival above. The tunnel has been called one of the most haunted locations within Waverly Hills. I'm going to conduct a full investigation of its entire length. He stepped inside. The temperature dropped immediately, his breath became visible, and the thermal camera registered a 15-degree difference between the tunnel and the basement. The walls were rough concrete, stained with decades of water seepage and covered in graffiti that grew progressively more disturbing the deeper he went. His footsteps echoed strangely, the sound bouncing off walls in a way that made it seem like multiple people were walking. Marcus paused 50 feet in and conducted an EVP session. "My name is Marcus Chen. I'm documenting activity in the death tunnel. If there are spirits present who were transported through this passage after death, I'd like to communicate with you. Can you tell me your name?" Silence. Then, from deeper in the tunnel, a sound, metal scraping on concrete like something heavy being dragged. Marcus's EMF detector spiked. His pulse accelerated, but he forced himself to move forward, following the sound. The tunnel curved slightly, descending at an angle that made walking awkward. 100-year-old tracks gleamed wetly in his flashlight beam. The scraping sound continued, irregular and grinding, always just ahead, always out of sight around the next curve. "I can hear you," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the fear climbing his spine. "I'm not here to disturb you. I only want to understand." The scraping stopped. In the sudden silence, Marcus became aware of his own breathing, harsh and rapid. The EMF detector was maxed out, screaming its warning. His thermal camera showed the tunnel ahead as a mass of cold spots, temperature variations that formed almost a pattern, shapes that might be human-sized, standing in a line down the center of the passage, waiting. Marcus continued forward. Professional objectivity demanded documentation. Personal survival instinct screamed at him to run. The medication and alcohol created a strange middle ground where both impulses existed simultaneously, fighting for control. He rounded the curve and his flashlight beam illuminated something that made him stop breathing. Scratches in the concrete walls, thousands of them, layered over each other like desperate prayers. Not graffiti, these were older, deeper, scored into the concrete with something sharp. Fingernails, Marcus realized. People had clawed at these walls. But why? The death tunnel had been for bodies, for the dead, not the living. Unless the records were wrong. Unless some of the people transported through this tunnel had still been alive. The thought crystallized with horrible clarity. Tuberculosis patients in the final stages, deemed terminal, perhaps transported down while still conscious, still fighting for those last desperate breaths, their fingers scraping uselessly against concrete as they were wheeled toward the waiting vehicles and the Potter's Field graves where so many nameless bodies had been dumped. Marcus's camera captured every detail of the scratch marks. His rational mind tried to offer alternatives, maintenance workers, modern vandals, but the marks were too old, too desperate, and too uniform in their downward dragging motion. These were the marks of people trying to claw their way back up, back to the light, back to life. He was so focused on documenting the walls that he almost didn't notice when his flashlight beam caught something ahead. A wheelchair sitting in the center of the tunnel, facing him. It was old, institutional metal, badly rusted. But unlike the wheelchair he'd seen on the second floor, this one was occupied. Marcus froze. His camera kept recording. The wheelchair sat approximately 30 feet ahead, and in it, silhouetted against the deeper darkness beyond, was a shape that might be human. It wasn't moving. Just sitting there, facing him, waiting. "Hello?" Marcus's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. "Can you hear me?" The figure didn't respond. Marcus checked his thermal camera. The wheelchair registered as cold, significantly colder than the surrounding air, but there was no heat signature from the figure. Either it was the same temperature as the environment or it wasn't producing heat at all. Marcus forced himself to move closer. 20 feet. 15. His flashlight beam should have illuminated the figure clearly at this distance, but somehow it remained indistinct, as if shadow clung to it in defiance of physics. 10 feet. He could see details now. The figure wore what looked like a hospital gown, stained and rotting. Its hands gripped the wheelchair's armrests. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle as if the neck was broken. 5 feet. Marcus stopped, his hand shaking so badly the flashlight beam danced across the walls. This close, he could see that the figure had no face, or rather, where a face should be, there was only smooth skin, stretched tight and featureless except for a slight indentation where a mouth might have been trying to form. "Are you?" Marcus didn't know how to finish the question. "Are you real? Are you dead? Are you waiting for me?" The figure moved. Not the jerky movement of someone suddenly animated, but slowly, smoothly like something mechanical switching on. Its head straightened, vertebrae cracking audibly. Then it stood up from the wheelchair, rising to its full height, at least 7 feet tall, impossibly thin, its hospital gown hanging from a skeletal frame. Marcus stumbled backward, his camera still rolling but his professionalism shattered. The figure took a step toward him. Another. Its movements were wrong, joints bending slightly too far, weight distribution not quite matching human biomechanics. The featureless face turned toward him, tracking his retreat with inhuman precision. Then it opened its mouth. The skin where the mouth was trying to form simply split, tearing vertically to reveal not teeth or tongue but a darkness so complete it seemed to absorb light. From that impossible throat came a sound, not words, not a scream, but something between the two. A vocalization that bypassed Marcus's ears entirely and resonated directly in his skull, in his bones, in the primitive brain stem where terror lived unfiltered by consciousness. Marcus ran. He fled back up the tunnel, his equipment banging against his body, his breathing ragged with panic. Behind him he heard footsteps, heavy, rapid, gaining. The rational part of his mind that had documented hundreds of investigations, that had remained calm through countless anomalous experiences, was screaming that this wasn't supposed to happen, that whatever was chasing him had crossed a line between the merely paranormal and something fundamentally wrong. He burst out of the tunnel entrance into the basement, spun around and aimed his flashlight back into the darkness. Empty. The tunnel was empty. No figure, no wheelchair, no pursuing footsteps. Just concrete and darkness and the lingering echo of his own panicked flight. Marcus collapsed against the wall, his chest heaving, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might tear itself apart. He checked his camera. Still recording. He rewound the footage to the moment he'd first seen the wheelchair. The camera showed everything. The wheelchair, the figure, its impossible movements, the splitting of its face. But when the figure stood and began walking toward him, something happened to the video. The image began to distort, pixels scrambling, the audio becoming a shriek of digital noise. The final frames before he fled showed only static and, buried within it, barely visible, dark shapes that might have been reaching toward the camera. Marcus sat on the cold basement floor, reviewing the footage again and again, his hands trembling. This was it. This was the proof he'd been chasing for 15 years. Undeniable visual evidence of something that couldn't be explained by any known science. His channel would explode. His financial problems would evaporate. He'd be vindicated, respected, acknowledged as a serious investigator rather than a charlatan or delusional obsessive. But as he watched the faceless figure stand and approach for the 7th time, a different thought crystallized. What if Emily had sent that text because she was experiencing something similar? What if his obsession with the paranormal had somehow attracted attention not just to him, but to everyone connected to him? What if by documenting these things, by giving them attention and acknowledgement, he'd been inviting them into his life? The medication was wearing off, leaving him jittery and paranoid. Marcus needed sleep, needed to process, needed to regain his professional objectivity. But he also needed to check on Emily. Needed to know she was safe. He returned to base camp and checked his phone. 4:47 a.m. Still no response from Emily. No response from Jennifer. He tried calling one more time. It rang 4 times, then Jennifer's voice, thick with sleep and anger. Marcus, it's almost 5 in the fucking morning. What? Is Emily okay? He interrupted. Please just tell me she's okay. Pause. Then coldly, she's fine. She's asleep in her dorm room where normal 18-year-olds are at this hour. Unlike her father, who's apparently in some abandoned building doing God knows what instead of being a present parent. She sent me a text saying she was scared. At 3:17 yesterday morning. I just need to know She probably had a nightmare and texted you in a moment of weakness. Don't use it as an excuse to insert yourself back into her life. You made your choices, Marcus. You chose ghosts over family. Live with it. The line went dead. Marcus sat in the darkness, Jennifer's words echoing in his mind. She was right. He'd made those choices. Every investigation instead of every birthday. Every equipment purchase instead of every child support payment. Every night in haunted locations instead of every night helping Emily with homework or just being present in the small, ordinary ways that comprised actual fatherhood. The building groaned around him, settling into the cold October night. Somewhere above, on one of the upper floors, something heavy dragged across concrete. Marcus ignored it. He needed to review more footage, needed to document everything properly. The work was what mattered. The documentation. The proof. His laptop screen illuminated his face in the darkness as he began transferring files. The death tunnel footage would need careful analysis. Frame-by-frame examination of the entity's movements. Audio spectral analysis of that sound it had made. Thermal data correlation with EMF readings. Hours of work. Marcus was so focused on the data that he almost didn't notice when his laptop's camera indicator light blinked on. He looked up, confused. He hadn't activated the webcam. The camera was recording on its own, the software opening autonomously. On the screen, in the small preview window showing what the webcam was capturing, Marcus saw himself sitting in the darkness of the lobby. And behind him, barely visible in the shadows, stood a tall, thin figure with a featureless face. He spun around. The lobby was empty. He looked back at the screen. The figure was still there in the webcam feed, standing directly behind where he sat, close enough that it should be touching him. As Marcus watched, paralyzed by an emotion beyond fear, the figure in the video slowly reached down toward his shoulder. Marcus felt cold fingers touch his neck. He lunged forward, knocking over his equipment, his laptop clattering to the floor. When he scrambled to pick it up, the webcam feed showed only himself, alone in the lobby, no figure, no impossible presence. But his neck still felt cold where those fingers had touched, and when he raised his hand to the spot, his fingers came away wet with something that looked black in the flashlight beam but smelled like old blood and antiseptic. The building was no longer just haunted. It was hunting. Marcus spent the remaining hours until dawn in a state of hypervigilance, every shadow a potential threat, every sound a harbinger of something worse. He documented everything mechanically, but his narration had lost its professional detachment. The camera caught his fear, his exhaustion, the way his hands shook when he moved equipment. By 7 a.m., gray daylight was filtering through the boarded windows, painting everything in shades of hopelessness. Marcus hadn't slept. The lorazepam bottle was significantly lighter. His bourbon flask was empty. And he still had one more night. One more night and the exploration of the fourth floor. Room 502. The place Gerald had specifically warned him against. The room where a nurse named Mary Hillenberg had allegedly committed suicide in 1928, hanging herself from the light fixture after discovering she was pregnant and unmarried. A scandal that would have destroyed her career and reputation in that era. Marcus knew the stories. Everyone who investigated Waverly knew about Room 502. It was the crown jewel of paranormal locations, the place where even hardened investigators reported overwhelming sensations of despair, violent poltergeist activity, and psychological attacks that left them changed. He'd left it for last because it was the climax, the final confrontation that would make or break his documentary. But now, sitting in the gray morning light with the sensation of phantom fingers still cold on his neck, Marcus wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Not just coming to Waverly Hills, but dedicating his life to chasing things that perhaps shouldn't be found. His phone buzzed. A text from Emily, "Sorry for worrying you. Just a bad dream. I'm okay." Marcus stared at the message, relief and suspicion warring in his exhausted mind. It didn't sound like Emily. She never apologized for worrying him because she'd long since stopped caring whether he worried. And the phrasing was wrong, too formal, too distant. He typed back, "What was your nightmare about?" 3 dots appeared, indicating she was typing. Then they disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, a response, "I dreamed something was in my room, watching me sleep. Something tall and thin with no face. It wanted to tell me something but it had no mouth. When I woke up, I could still feel it there in the dark." Marcus's blood went cold. The same entity. Emily had seen the same entity. Hundreds of miles away, in a college dorm room in Indianapolis, his daughter had experienced what he was experiencing. He was about to type a response when another text arrived. "Dad, are you somewhere bad? I feel like something followed you home from one of your investigations. Like it's been in our house. Mom won't believe me but I know you will. Please come home." Marcus read the message 3 times. Every investigator knew the stories about attachments, spirits or entities that followed you home after investigations. He'd always been skeptical, chalking it up to psychological suggestion or simply the normal process of readjusting to everyday life after immersion in haunted locations. But what if it was real? What if his years of investigating had accumulated something, drawn attention from things that existed in the margins of reality? And what if coming to Waverly Hills, this nexus of death and suffering, had strengthened that connection? He typed back, "Emily, I believe you. I'll be home in 24 hours. Until then, don't sleep alone. Stay with your roommate. Keep lights on. If you feel anything, say out loud, 'You are not welcome here. Leave.' Say it with authority. Can you do that?" The response came immediately, "Yes. Dad, I'm scared." "I know, baby. I know. I'm scared too. But I'm coming home and we'll figure this out together. I promise." Marcus set down his phone and stared at the 4th-floor stairwell. He had a choice to make. He could pack up now, leave immediately, get home to Emily and deal with whatever was happening there. Or he could complete the investigation, document room 502, finish what he'd started. The old Marcus, the one who'd missed birthdays and graduations, would have stayed without question. The documentation mattered more than anything. The proof was paramount. But sitting in the gray morning light of Waverly Hills, with his daughter's fear fresh in his mind and the sensation of phantom fingers still cold on his neck, Marcus Chin realized that some prices were too high to pay. Some questions shouldn't be answered. Some doors once opened couldn't be closed. He began packing his equipment. As he dismantled his base camp, his motion-activated camera, the one he'd left in the death tunnel, began beeping. Someone had triggered it. At 7:23 a.m., something had moved in the tunnel, and the camera had captured it. Marcus pulled up the footage on his laptop. The timestamp showed 7:21 a.m., approximately 15 minutes ago. The camera's view showed the tunnel's entrance, the perspective looking out into the basement. For 30 seconds nothing happened. Then, walking slowly up from the depths of the tunnel, emerging from that deep darkness into the lesser darkness of the basement, came the figure. It moved with that same wrong biomechanics, joints bending too far, weight distributed impossibly. As it approached the camera, its featureless face turned directly toward the lens, as if it knew exactly where the camera was, as if it had come specifically for this moment. The figure stopped 2 feet from the camera. It stood there, perfectly still, for 10 seconds. Then it raised one elongated hand and pointed. Not at the camera. Past it. Upward. Toward the 4th floor. Toward room 502. The footage ended. Marcus sat frozen, his partially packed equipment scattered around him. The message was clear. It wasn't done with him. Whatever haunted Waverly Hills wanted him to complete the investigation. It wanted him to go to room 502. And somehow, impossibly, it knew about Emily, knew about his life outside these walls, knew exactly how to ensure his compliance. His phone buzzed again. Emily, Dad, it's in my room right now. I can see it in the corner. Please help me. Marcus looked at the 4th floor stairwell. Then at his phone. Then at the footage of the figure pointing upward. He understood now. This was never about documentation or proof or validation. This was a transaction. The entity wanted something from him, wanted him to go to room 502, to witness something, to participate in something, and it was using Emily as leverage. Marcus Chin had spent 15 years chasing ghosts. Now one was chasing his daughter. And the only way to save her was to give it exactly what it wanted. He left his equipment scattered across the lobby floor. He took only his primary camera, one flashlight, and his nearly empty bottle of lorazepam. Then he walked toward the stairwell that led to the 4th floor, each step feeling like a descent into something far worse than mere death. Behind him, in the lobby's shadows, something that had been waiting began to follow. Chapter 3, The Abyss Looks Back. The 4th floor stairwell was narrower than the others, as if the building itself was constricting, trying to prevent his ascent. Marcus climbed slowly, his flashlight beam cutting through dust motes that hung suspended in the air like frozen stars. Each step echoed with a hollow sound that seemed to come from somewhere other than his feet, as if the building was mocking his footfalls, repeating them back with subtle variations in timing. His phone buzzed continuously in his pocket. Emily's messages were coming faster now, more desperate. Dad, it's getting closer. Dad, please. Dad, I can see its face now except it doesn't have one. Dad, it's touching me. Marcus's hands shook as he climbed. The lorazepam wasn't working anymore, or perhaps he'd built up too much tolerance, or perhaps no amount of medication could calm someone walking voluntarily toward the thing that nightmares feared. His camera recorded everything with mechanical indifference, the red recording light a tiny beacon of normalcy in circumstances that had transcended normal reality. The 4th floor landing opened onto a corridor that looked different from the others. The graffiti here was minimal, as if even vandals had been reluctant to linger. The air was wrong, not just cold but dense, pressing against his eardrums like deep water. Several doors along the corridor stood open, revealing patient rooms that seemed darker than physics allowed, as if light itself was being absorbed rather than reflected. At the end of the corridor, a single door stood closed. Room 502. Someone had painted the numbers in what looked like dried blood, though Marcus knew it was probably just rust-colored paint. Below the numbers, fresher graffiti in white spray paint. She's still waiting. Marcus approached the door, his footsteps loud in the oppressive silence. He paused 6 feet away and checked his equipment. EMF detector. Maxed out before he even activated it, the device screaming continuously. Thermal camera. The door registered as significantly colder than the surrounding walls, approximately 30 degrees Fahrenheit, below freezing in a building with no climate control. His audio recorder picked up sounds he couldn't consciously hear. Low-frequency vibrations, almost infrasonic, the kind that induced primal fear responses in mammals. "My name is Marcus Chin," he said, filming the door. "It's 7:47 a.m. on October 20th. I'm standing outside room 502, where nurse Mary Hillenberg allegedly committed suicide in 1928. For the past 2 nights, I've documented significant paranormal activity throughout this building, culminating in an entity that appears to be targeting both me and my daughter. If anything happens to me, this footage will serve as evidence of what I experienced." He reached for the doorknob. It was ice cold, burning his palm with the intensity of its chill. The door opened with a sound like tearing fabric, revealing a room that defied the building's geometry. Room 502 was impossibly large. The patient room should have been perhaps 12 by 15 feet, but the space beyond the door stretched into darkness that his flashlight couldn't penetrate. The floor was covered in scattered papers, patient records, medical charts, letters that had yellowed with age. In the center of the room stood a hospital bed, and on the bed, sitting with perfect posture, was a woman in a nurse's uniform from the 1920s. She was not a ghost in the traditional sense. No transparency, no ethereal glow. She appeared completely solid, real, as if she'd been sitting there waiting for 97 years and the passage of time had been irrelevant to her vigil. Her face was young, perhaps 25, and would have been beautiful except for 2 details. Her eyes were completely black, lacking any white or iris, and her neck bore the deep purple bruising of ligature strangulation, the mark of the rope that had ended her life. "Mary Hillenberg?" Marcus whispered. The woman's head turned toward him with smooth precision. When she spoke, her voice came from everywhere and nowhere, bypassing his ears and resonating directly in his skull. "You brought it with you. The thing from below. The thing that was never human. It's been feeding on this place for so long, growing stronger on all the death, all the suffering. But it's hungry for something more now. It wants to leave. It wants to follow you home." Marcus felt his camera growing heavy in his hands. "What is it? What does it want from me?" Mary stood from the bed, and Marcus noticed that her feet didn't quite touch the floor. She hovered 2 inches above the scattered papers, her nurse's uniform pristine despite nearly a century in this room. "It wants permission. These old places, they have rules. Spirits like me were bound by what happened to us, by the places where we died. But the thing in the tunnel, the thing with no face, it's older. It was here before the hospital, sleeping in the earth. The bodies woke it. 63,000 deaths, all that fear and pain and despair, it fed on them like wine. But it's still bound to this place. It can't leave unless someone invites it. Unless someone gives it a door." "I didn't invite anything," Marcus protested, but even as he spoke, he knew it was a lie. Every investigation, every EVP session, every time he'd asked spirits to communicate, to show themselves, to prove their existence, hadn't that been an invitation? Hadn't he been opening doors his entire career, never considering what might walk through? Mary moved closer, her black eyes fixed on him with something that might have been pity. "Your daughter. You love her? More than anything. Then you need to understand what's happening. The entity has already attached itself to you. It's been following you for years, feeding on your obsession, your grief, your guilt. Every haunted place you visited, it went with you. Every ghost you documented, it studied. It's been learning about your world, about your connections. And now it's found the strongest one. Your daughter is sensitive. She can feel it. That makes her a door too." Marcus felt something break inside him. Not his sanity, but something more fundamental, the last illusion of control he'd been clinging to. "How do I stop it?" Mary's expression shifted, and for a moment, Marcus saw the young woman she'd been before despair drove her to the light fixture, before the rope stole her breath and her future. "You can't stop it. But you can contain it. The entity is bound to this building by all the death that happened here. If you stay, if you become part of Waverly Hills, it stays too. One life to contain something that would consume hundreds, maybe thousands. You want me to die here. It wasn't a question. I want you to choose. Your life for your daughter's. Your presence here, feeding it, keeping it satisfied, or your daughter's lifetime of being hunted by something that won't stop, that will eventually consume everyone she loves until she has nothing left but the darkness and the despair that we all knew in this place." Marcus looked at his camera, still recording, still documenting. His entire adult life had been about capturing proof, about validation, about being right. And here it was, proof of survival after death, proof that consciousness persisted, proof that the paranormal was devastatingly real. But the cost of that proof was everything. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Emily had sent a video. Marcus played it with trembling hands. The footage showed Emily's dorm room, filmed from her phone. She was breathing hard, the camera shaking as she panned across the small space. "Dad, I'm documenting this like you taught me. Evidence. Proof." The camera stopped on the corner of the room near her closet. Standing there, impossibly tall in the confined space, was the faceless entity. As Marcus watched, it moved toward Emily, one elongated hand reaching out. Emily's voice came through the phone speakers. "Dad, I can't move. Dad, it's touching my face. Dad, it's..." The video cut to black. Marcus tried to call. The phone rang and rang. No answer. He called again. Nothing. He sent a text. "Emily, answer me. Answer me." The message showed as delivered but not read. Mary Hillenberg's voice cut through his panic. "She's still alive. It hasn't taken her yet. But it will. Unless you make the choice. Unless you stay." "How?" Marcus demanded. "How do I do it? How do I bind myself here?" Mary gestured toward the light fixture hanging from the ceiling, the same fixture she'd used 97 years ago. A rope hung from it, old and frayed but still intact, as if it had been waiting for exactly this moment. "The same way I did. Despair is the strongest binding. A death by choice, by overwhelming hopelessness. It creates a stain that doesn't fade. You'll become part of this place, part of what keeps the entity fed and satisfied. It will stop hunting your daughter because it will have you instead. Forever." Marcus stared at the rope. His entire body was shaking now, adrenaline and medication and terror creating a cocktail that made thinking almost impossible. But through the chaos, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. Emily was 18. She had her whole life ahead of her. College, career, love, children of her own maybe. All the experiences he'd already had and squandered in his obsession with the dead. Wasn't this what fathers were supposed to do? Sacrifice themselves for their children? "Will she remember me?" Marcus asked quietly. "She'll remember that you loved her. Finally. At the end. She'll remember that you chose her." Marcus set down his camera, positioning it to capture what would happen next. The investigator in him, even now, needed the documentation. Needed the proof. He typed one last message to Emily. "I love you more than anything in this world or the next. I'm sorry I didn't show it better. You're going to be safe now. Live your life, baby girl. Be happy. Don't chase ghosts. Don't end up like me." He pressed send. Then he picked up the rope. It felt ancient in his hands, rough fiber that had held the weight of Mary's death for nearly a century. As Marcus tied it around his neck, his hands moving with strange calm, as if this was always how the story was meant to end, he thought about all the investigations, all the haunted places, all the years spent chasing proof of life after death. He was about to become his own evidence. "One question," Marcus said, the rope rough against his throat. "Will it hurt?" Mary's expression softened. "Only for a moment. Then you'll be part of this place. Part of what it remembers. And the entity will stay here, bound by your sacrifice, feeding on what you've given it. Your daughter will be free." Marcus climbed onto the bed. The old frame creaked under his weight. He could feel his phone buzzing in his pocket. Probably Jennifer calling back, probably Emily trying to reach him. But he couldn't look. If he looked, if he heard Emily's voice, he might not have the courage to finish this. He thought about his grandmother, who died when he was 12. She told him stories about Chinese hungry ghosts, spirits trapped by their own desires, unable to move forward, unable to let go. Marcus had spent his adult life studying Western hauntings, but now, standing in room 502 with a rope around his neck, he understood what his grandmother had been trying to teach him. Some hungers can't be satisfied and the chase itself becomes the trap. "Tell me it will work," Marcus said. "Tell me Emily will be safe." Mary nodded. "The entity keeps its bargains. That's the oldest rule. A life for a life. Your presence for her freedom." Marcus closed his eyes. He thought of Emily as a baby, the first time he'd held her, how impossibly small and perfect she'd been. He thought of her 5th birthday party before the first divorce, when he'd actually been present, actually been a father. He thought of her voice saying, "Dad, I'm scared," and how that was the last thing she should ever have to feel because of him. He stepped off the bed. The rope caught. Held. The pressure on his throat was immediate and overwhelming. His body's survival instinct kicked in, legs thrashing, hands clawing at the rope. But Marcus Chin had spent 15 years training himself to push through fear, to document even when every instinct screamed to flee. He forced his hands down, forced himself to stop fighting, forced himself to let it happen. The camera kept recording. The world began to darken at the edges. Marcus's last conscious thought was of Emily, safe in her dorm room, The entity finally leaving her alone because it had what it wanted. Then darkness. Then nothing. Then Marcus opened his eyes. He was lying on the floor of room 502. The rope was gone. The bed was empty. Mary Hillenberg was nowhere to be seen. Pale morning sunlight streamed through the window, impossibly bright after 2 days of oppressive gloom. His phone was ringing. Marcus grabbed it with shaking hands. Emily's name on the screen. He answered, "Emily? Are you? Dad?" Her voice was panicked but alive, blessedly alive. "Dad, something happened. I was in my room and that thing was there, it was touching me and then suddenly it just dissolved. Like smoke. It's gone. I can't feel it anymore. Whatever you did, it worked. Dad, are you okay?" Marcus touched his throat. No rope burn. No bruising. He looked at his camera, still recording, red light steady. He checked the footage, rewinding to the moment he'd stepped off the bed. The video showed him standing on the bed with the rope around his neck. It showed him stepping off. But the rope hadn't held. In the footage, it snapped immediately, ancient fibers finally surrendering after nearly a century. Marcus had fallen to the floor, hitting his head on the bed frame, losing consciousness for maybe 30 seconds. The entity hadn't needed his death. It had needed his willingness to die. The choice itself had been the binding, the sacrifice. Intent mattered more than outcome in whatever mathematics governed the paranormal. "Dad." Emily's voice pulled him back. "Are you there?" "I'm here, baby. I'm okay. I'm coming home. Promise." "I promise." Marcus ended the call and stood on shaking legs. Room 502 looked different now, just a regular patient room, dirty and abandoned but no longer impossibly large, no longer dark with supernatural presence. The oppressive atmosphere was gone. Whatever had been here was gone too. He gathered his equipment and walked toward the door. Behind him, so faint he might have imagined it, Mary Hillenberg's voice whispered, "Thank you for choosing love. The entity is bound now. Not by death but by your willingness to die. That's stronger. That will hold longer. Go home, Marcuschin. Be the father you should have been." Marcus descended through Waverly Hills one final time. The building felt different, still sad, still heavy with the weight of all those deaths but no longer actively malevolent. Just a place where terrible things had happened, where suffering had accumulated but couldn't hurt anymore. He loaded his equipment into the Toyota 4Runner as the sun climbed higher, burning away the October morning chill. Before he started the engine, he reviewed one last piece of footage, the motion-activated camera he'd left in the death tunnel. The timestamp showed 8:03 a.m., approximately the same time Marcus had stepped off that bed. The footage showed the faceless entity walking back down the tunnel, descending into the darkness from which it had emerged. As it walked, it grew less substantial, more shadow than shape, until finally it merged with the darkness at the tunnel's deepest point and was gone. Bound. Contained. Satisfied by the sacrifice offered if not completed. Marcus drove away from Waverly Hills Sanatorium as the sun climbed toward noon, heading toward Indianapolis, toward his daughter, toward whatever remained of his life. In his rearview mirror, the Gothic building grew smaller, just an architectural monument to suffering rather than a living nightmare. His documentary would be incomplete. Room 502 would show him attempting suicide and failing. The entity would appear in multiple pieces of footage but never with the clear, undeniable proof he'd always chased. It would be compelling, disturbing, but not the definitive evidence he'd sacrificed everything to obtain. But Marcuschin was done chasing ghosts. Done sacrificing family for proof. Done letting his obsession consume everything worth living for. He'd spend the rest of his life making it up to Emily. Being present. Being the father he should have been from the beginning. And if some small part of him remained bound to Waverly Hills, if his willingness to die there had created a thin tether connecting him to that place, if he sometimes woke in the night feeling phantom rope around his throat and hearing the distant echo of footsteps in the death tunnel, well, that was a price he could live with. Some debts can only be paid with pieces of yourself. Marcus had paid his. And Emily was free. That was enough. Chapter 4, Eternal Scars. Epilogue 6 months later. The view counter on the final Waverly Hills video read 8,347,291. Comments section locked after the first week when the debates about authenticity versus staged footage became too heated. Marcus's channel had exploded, 2.3 million subscribers had become 6.7 million practically overnight. Sponsorship offers flooded his email. Production companies wanted to option his story for a documentary series. Netflix had reached out about a feature film adaptation. Marcus ignored all of it. He sat in a coffee shop in Indianapolis, watching through the window as Emily crossed the campus quad toward him. 6 months since Waverly Hills and she'd grown, not physically but in the way people do when they've faced something that stripped away illusions about the world's fundamental nature. She knew now that the darkness was real, that consciousness persisted beyond death, that things existed in the margins that were never meant to be perceived by living minds. She also knew her father had been willing to die for her. That knowledge had changed their relationship in ways Marcus was still processing. Emily entered the coffee shop, spotted him and smiled, tentative but genuine. She'd forgiven him or was trying to, which was more than he deserved. They'd been meeting weekly since Marcus had come home from Waverly Hills. No cameras. No investigations. Just a father and daughter trying to rebuild what he'd demolished through years of obsession. "Hey Dad." She sat across from him, ordering a vanilla latte when the barista came by. "How was class?" "Existentialist philosophy. We're reading Camus." Turns out confronting the absurdity of existence is easier when you haven't actually confronted something that defies existence. She smiled, but Marcus could see the shadow behind her eyes, the knowledge that most people went their entire lives without confirming that reality was negotiable. "Do you still feel it?" Marcus asked quietly. "The thing from that night?" Emily was quiet for a moment, stirring her latte when it arrived. "Sometimes. Not like before. Not like it's there. More like a memory of a presence? Like how you can remember pain without actually feeling it. Does that make sense?" Perfect sense. Marcus felt the same thing, that thin tether connecting him to Waverly Hills, to room 502, to the moment he'd stepped off that bed with rope around his throat. Sometimes he woke at 3:17 a.m., always 3:17, the exact time Emily had first texted him, with the sensation of phantom fingers on his neck. Sometimes he saw movement in his peripheral vision, tall and thin and impossible. But it never came closer. The boundary held. The bargain remained intact. "Jennifer called me," Emily said, pulling him from his thoughts. "Mom." She asked if you were really done with the paranormal stuff. "What did you tell her?" "That I think you are. That you sold all your equipment except one camera. That you're applying for teaching positions instead of planning investigations. That you show up when you say you will now." Emily met his eyes. "Are you done, Dad? Really?" Marcus thought about the offers sitting in his email. The money would solve all his problems. The debt, the child support arrears, the apartment lease he couldn't afford. One more investigation. One more documentary. One more dive into the darkness. But he'd seen what lived in that darkness now. Seen it not as an investigator seeking proof, but as a father desperate to protect his daughter. The darkness wasn't some abstract mystery to be documented. It was hungry. It was patient. And it was always waiting for people like him. Obsessives, seekers, the ones who couldn't leave well enough alone. "I'm done," Marcus said and meant it. "I've got one camera for personal documentation and that's it. No more investigations. No more haunted locations. No more chasing ghosts." "But you're still paying the price, aren't you?" Emily asked softly. "For what happened there?" "It left a mark." Marcus could have lied. Could have reassured her that he was fine, that Waverly Hills was just another investigation that ended without incident. But Emily had earned honesty from him. "Yeah," he admitted. "It left a mark. I feel connected to that place in a way I can't fully explain. Like part of me is still standing in room 502, rope around my neck, making that choice over and over. Sometimes I dream I'm walking through the death tunnel and the walls are covered in scratch marks and I know they're mine, that I've been clawing my way down instead of up, that I chose wrong and now I'm trapped there forever. Dad. But then I wake up," Marcus continued. "And you're safe. And I get to have coffee with my daughter instead of abandoning her for some haunted building on the other side of the country. That mark, that connection, that price. It's worth it. You're worth it." Emily's eyes welled up. She reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm sorry I said I hated you. After Mom's divorce. I was 14 and angry and you had every right to be angry. I was a terrible father. I chose my obsession over you, over everything. What happened at Waverly Hills, it wasn't redemption. It was just me finally making the right choice after years of wrong ones." They sat in silence for a moment, the coffee shop's ambient noise washing over them. Marcus watched students passing outside, oblivious to the reality that lurked beneath the world's surface. He envied them their ignorance, even as he knew he could never return to it. "I've been thinking about going into psychology," Emily said eventually. "Specializing in trauma and paranormal experiences. There must be thousands of people who've experienced things they can't explain, things that change them. They need help processing it, integrating it, moving forward without being consumed by it. Like you're trying to do. Marcus felt a swell of pride so intense it was almost painful. You'd be incredible at that. I'd need to do research, case studies, maybe even careful, ethical documentation of paranormal experiences. Emily met his eyes. Maybe we could work together. Not investigations. Not entertainment. Real research to help people who are suffering. It was a lifeline Marcus hadn't known he needed. A way to use his experience without being consumed by the obsession again. I'd like that. As long as we set boundaries. No solo investigations. No places with active malevolent entities. No. No Waverly Hills, Emily finished. I know, Dad. We're not going back there. Whatever you bound, it needs to stay bound. Marcus squeezed her hand. Deal. They talked for another hour, making plans for Emily's summer break, discussing her classes, carefully rebuilding the foundation of their relationship. When they parted, Emily hugged him, the first real, unself-conscious hug in years, and Marcus felt something tight in his chest finally loosen. He drove back to his apartment as evening settled over Indianapolis. The one-bedroom was small, shabby, all he could afford after selling his investigation equipment to pay down debt. But it had windows that let in light, neighbors who made ordinary noise, no shadows that moved wrong. Marcus opened his laptop to check email and found a message that made his blood go cold. The sender, Waverly Hills Preservation Society at gmail.com. Subject line, thank you for your visit. Body text, Mr. Chin, we reviewed the footage you submitted for our archives as part of your investigation agreement. We found it fascinating. Particularly the recordings from room 502. We have a question about what occurred during your final hours in the building. Could you please contact us at your earliest convenience? There are some inconsistencies in the timeline we'd like to discuss. Also, we've received reports from other investigators who visited since your departure. They claim to hear someone calling for help from room 502. They say it sounds like a man's voice. They say he's asking for Emily. Marcus closed the laptop with shaking hands. His phone showed 11:47 p.m., exactly the time he'd arrived at Waverly Hills 6 months ago. Outside his apartment window, Indianapolis stretched out in a grid of lights, millions of people living normal lives, unaware of the things that existed in the margins. In the corner of his bedroom, where the shadows were deepest, Marcus saw movement. Tall. Thin. Impossible. The entity wasn't gone. It had never been gone. The binding hadn't worked, or it had worn off, or perhaps the sacrifice had been insufficient all along. Or worse, perhaps Marcus had been wrong about what the entity wanted. Perhaps it hadn't wanted to leave Waverly Hills. Perhaps it had wanted him to come back. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, Dad, it's in my room again. Please help me. Please come home. But Emily was in her dorm room 300 miles away. And Marcus had just left her 2 hours ago. She'd hugged him goodbye. She'd been fine. Unless that hadn't been Emily. Unless what he'd been meeting with for 6 months, rebuilding a relationship with, making plans with, the thing in the corner moved closer. Marcus could see it clearly now, silhouetted against the window. Featureless face, elongated limbs, that wrong biomechanics that had haunted his nightmares for months. It reached into its pocket. Did it have pockets? Did it even have clothes? And pulled out something small and rectangular. A phone. It held it up, screen illuminated. On the screen, a video played. Emily, real Emily, sitting in what looked like room 502, rope around her neck, standing on a bed. Dad, her recorded voice said, I don't know if you'll ever see this. But the thing from Waverly Hills, it never left. It followed you home. It's been pretending. Made itself look like you. For 6 months I've been meeting what I thought was my father, but Dad, it wasn't you. You never left Waverly Hills. You're still there, aren't you? You're still in room 502. The rope held. The fall didn't save you. The video continued. If you're seeing this, then the thing is about to show you the truth. It needed you to believe the lie, that you'd survive, that you'd come home, that you'd fix things with Emily. It fed on that hope. But Dad, the truth is worse. You died in that room. And everything since then has been. The entity lowered the phone. When it spoke, its voice was Marcus's own voice, perfect mimicry, like hearing himself on a recording. Has been the death tunnel. You never walked up. You only walked down. You've been descending for 6 months, Marcus Chin, deeper and deeper into the dark, and now you've finally reached the bottom. The apartment dissolved. The lights, the furniture, the windows showing Indianapolis, all of it peeled away like stage scenery being struck after a performance. What remained was concrete walls covered in scratch marks, a downward slope, rail tracks in the center. Marcus was standing in the death tunnel. He'd never left. The rope had held. The fall had been successful. Everything since Emily's texts, the coffee shop meetings, the rebuilding of their relationship, had been the entity's gift to him, a pleasant hallucination to feed on while his consciousness slowly died, tethered to Waverly Hills by the same binding that held Mary Hillenberg. Marcus Chin had gotten his proof of life after death. He'd become part of the evidence. And the entity had gotten what it wanted all along, not to leave Waverly Hills, but to ensure someone remained here, trapped and aware, generating the fear and despair it needed to survive. In the distance, deeper in the tunnel, Marcus heard footsteps. Multiple sets. Other investigators who'd made the same mistake, accepted the same bargain, believed the same lie. An endless procession of the trapped and the foolish, all walking down, always down, chasing proof that had already consumed them. Marcus looked at his hands. They were translucent now, fading. Whatever consciousness he had left was finally accepting the truth. He was dead. He'd been dead for 6 months. And he'd be dead forever, bound to this place, part of the entity's feeding mechanism. His last thought, as his hands disappeared entirely and he became just another voice in the darkness, was of Emily. Real Emily. Still alive, still free, having never reconciled with the thing that pretended to be her father. The entity had lied about everything. But it had kept one promise. Emily was safe. She'd grieved Marcus's death 6 months ago when his body was found in room 502, rope burns on his throat, camera still recording. She'd been safe all along. Marcus Chin had just been too dead to know it. Final transcript, recovered from camera found in room 502, 6 months after investigation. YouTube upload by Waverly Hills Preservation Society. Title: Final footage of Marcus Chin Waverly Hills investigation October 20th, views, 47,293,847. Top comment, pinned, "My father died trying to prove that consciousness survives death." This footage proves he was right. It also proves he was wrong to seek that proof. Some questions shouldn't be answered. Some doors shouldn't be opened. If you're reading this, please learn from his mistake. Don't chase ghosts. Live your life while you still can. Emily Chin. Video description. This is the final footage recorded by paranormal investigator Marcus Chin during his 72-hour solo investigation of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Content warning. This video contains footage of suicide and disturbing paranormal activity. Marcus's daughter, Emily Chin, has authorized its release in hopes that it will prevent others from making similar mistakes. The Waverly Hills Preservation Society does not permit overnight investigations. Marcus's death was a tragedy. Please respect this location and the people who died here. Don't become another statistic. End of recovered footage. Epilogue. Final message. Thank you for experiencing this journey into the darkest corners of Waverly Hills Sanatorium. This story is a reminder that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and that the price of absolute proof may be more than any of us are willing or able to pay. If this story disturbed you, made you question reality, or left you looking over your shoulder in the dark, good. That's exactly what it was meant to do. The best horror doesn't end when the credits roll. It follows you home. It makes you wonder. It changes how you see shadows. Marcus Chin thought he was documenting ghosts. He never realized he was becoming one. We want to hear from you. What would you have done in Marcus's situation? Would you have made the same choice for your child? Have you ever experienced something paranormal that you couldn't explain? Share your stories in the comments. What's the scariest location you know of? Maybe it will be our next investigation. Don't forget to like this video if you want more deep dive horror narratives. Subscribe for more terrifying true paranormal stories. Share with someone who needs to lose sleep tonight. Turn on notifications if you dare. Remember, the dead don't rest at Waverly Hills. And after watching this, neither will you. Stay scared. Stay safe. And whatever you do, don't go to room 502. Hidden final scene. Post-credits. Camera activates in static-filled darkness. Date stamp. November 28, 2025, present day. Location. Room 502, Waverly Hills Sanatorium. A figure sits on the hospital bed. Hospital gown. Translucent. Staring directly at the camera. Marcus's voice, distant and hollow. If you're watching this, you've made it to the end of the story. You've seen what happened to me. You've learned the lesson I learned too late. He stands, moves closer to the camera. But here's the thing about warnings and horror stories. People never listen. They always think they'll be different. They always believe they'll be smarter, more careful, more prepared. His face fills the frame now, details wrong, eyes too dark, skin too pale, that rope burn still visible on his neck. They never are. Behind him, in the darkness of room 502, dozens of shapes become visible. Other investigators. Other seekers. All trapped. All waiting. Waverly Hills is still taking reservations. The entity is still hungry. And there's always room for one more in room 502. Marcus smiles, wrong too wide, teeth too sharp. See you soon. Camera cuts to black. In the silence, barely audible, footsteps. Walking down. Always down. Into the death tunnel. Forever. The end.